Hello and welcome to Pod of the Dam presents Bucket List Horror, a brand new series of episodes where a different special guest will join us to lobby for a horror movie of their choosing to be included on Pod of the Dam's definitive list of horror movies that you should see before you die. Now today we are joined on our very first episode of this side series, someone who I've recorded several episodes with on the House That Screams podcast. We've had some very lively debates over a number of different movies. It is El Jefe del Horror himself. Nico Nice joins us on the show. How are you doing, my friend?
I am honored to be your first guest. I thank you for, giving me the chance to talk about one of my all-time favorite horror movie to kind of maybe get a little bit more awareness out, even though it has plenty of awareness, but
Yeah,
there's your pun with the where in there. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We're not talking about a completely unknown horror movie here today, but we're the movie that we're talking about today, is probably not one that comes up, when people are saying, what's the greatest horror movies of all time, and we briefly just chatted about that before I hit record there. People always go to the Halloweens and the Aliens and the Elm Streets and the Fridays, and this one's is probably not really always the first choice out there. So I'm looking forward to sort of hearing what you've got to say about it. But before we get into today's movie topic, we'll quickly just do the plugs and get those out of the way. This is obviously the first side seeded for us on Pod of the Damned. If you'd like to follow our socials, you can do so. We're on Twitter at Damn Podcast, Facebook, Instagram is Pod of the Damned. Nico, obviously, you're part of our podcasting family. Between our two shows, there's been I've lost count of the crossover episodes we've had now between
too many.
Between our two shows, but this is actually the first time that we've done a crossover together. It's something that I've been really keen to do for quite a while now.
As have I. As have I.
But I'm obviously aware that you're a busy fellow.
Yeah, to say the least. I mean, I'm working on my own thing now. I have a script ready. We're just trying to work on the financing. I'm in the middle of casting now to help get the financing, which you can follow on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the new app Threads, which I have no idea what that is, but we're on there. It's Sticks and Stones Movie. You can find me on Twitter at El Jefe del Horror, and you can also follow our podcast, The House That Screams, on all of the socials. I think they're on Threads now too. Whatever that may be, it's there. So
yeah, I've very briefly sort of signed us up for Threads, but I've really got no clue how it works. So
I honestly just posted a couple of pictures from that we made for logos for the film. That was it. I have no idea what this thing is, but we're on there.
Well, apparently there's like 100 million people on there now, so it might become a thing that we maybe need to familiarize ourselves with a bit more.
Probably,
with
probably.
With the slow demise of the Bird app. So,
yeah.
Anyways,
you're right.
Anyways, probably a discussion for another day, because we could probably sit here and fill quite a few hours about social media. So, we shall get into the episode topic of the day. The movie that we're going to be talking about is An American Werewolf in London. It was released in 1981, written and directed by John Landis, stars David Naughton, Jenny Agutter, and Griffin Dunn. The IMDb plot: two American college students on a walking tour of Britain are attacked by a werewolf that none of the locals will admit exists. Just quickly going through the stats of the movie. So the critics' ratings for it: IMDb have got 7.5. It's got a Metascore of 55, 89% fresh from the Rotten Tomatoes critics, 85% fresh from the Rotten Tomatoes audience. We have covered An American Werewolf in London on the main podcast of the Pod of the Damned. It currently sits in 31st place on our leaderboard out of 76 with a score of 7.2 out of 10. It is worth pointing out that there's probably less than half a point between about 20 movies at the moment on our leaderboard. So, it could, it's right there with like the top 10. 10th to 30th, I think there's less than 1 point between them. So, sometimes when you look and you think, 31st out of 76, it's not very high, but it's so stacked in there with movies, one thing we will be doing as well, we will always put it to a poll to our followers on social media. Is An American Werewolf in London a bucket list horror movie? A movie that they would consider that they should see before they die? It got 107 votes on this poll. 86% of our followers said yes, An American Werewolf in London is a bucket list horror movie, with just 14% saying no. So, it's fair to say that the critics love this movie. Our fans and followers love this movie. We're really fond of this movie on this podcast. But Nico, I want to know why you love An American Werewolf in London.
And to also kind of give a little bit of a prologue for that, we also covered it on The House That Screams, and I do believe it got nearly a perfect score on that as well from all of us that were on the panel for that one as well on the dais for that. This is probably, and I'm not saying that probably, it is my favorite horror movie of all time. How I discovered it was kind of interesting. I was a kid and I was afraid of horror movies back in the day, like all of us were growing up, even though like we loved it and we loved the thrill of being scared and the special effects and all the monsters and killers and what have you in the horror genre. And Michael Jackson's Thriller had just come out and I was pissed scared of this thing. When he turned into the werewolf, the zombie dance didn't bother me, but it was always that fucking werewolf scene that always gave me nightmares. And then when the VHS came out, my mom bought it. She sat me down and made me watch this, and I was freaking out, having an attack because of the werewolf scene. And then after the movie was done for the short film for it, she's like, "Now wait, because they're going to show you how they did it." And when I actually saw the making of Thriller and saw the amazing Rick Baker doing the makeup for the transformation scene, and then for the zombie in the film, or the short film for Thriller, Michael Jackson mentioned that he had seen American Werewolf in London. There was a sit-down interview on the VHS where it's Michael Jackson and John Landis talking about how they were familiar with each other. And John Landis knew Michael Jackson from the Jackson 5 when he was little Michael Jackson. And John Landis had asked him, "Did you ever see any of my films? Like, you see Schlock?" "No." "Kentucky Fried Movie?" "No." And he said he saw Animal House, but really it was An American Werewolf in London that inspired him to make the type of music video that Thriller was going to be, so much so that he hired pretty much the entire crew, including Landis and Baker, to do the video. But when they showed the clip of the werewolf just having like that scene in Piccadilly Circus, there was just something about it. I was like, what is this movie that I have to watch? So my uncle actually was very much a cinephile in the day, back in the day, and he was always dubbing videos. We call them dubbing. I don't know what they call them there, but we call them dubbing, where you just copy from VCR to VCR. And he happened to have An American Werewolf in London, and it was funny because he used to tape the covers with like black, like almost like duct tape.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the label maker, because that's when label makers were like the shit back then. And he had them all alphabetized and whatnot. He always told me, so you can watch whatever you want, just make sure you put it back, rewind it, whatever. So just on a whim, I grabbed American Werewolf in London and I popped it in. And from the opening credits, when Blue Moon plays, I was hooked. I was immediately into the story. And then seeing after the werewolf attack, and it wasn't scary at all. It was just this fucking like amazing, like it was a monster movie, pure and simple. And then, when we get to see Jack deteriorating after he's killed, and he's slowly decomposing each time he's coming to warn David about what's coming with the full moon, leading up to probably the only transformation scene still before it and after it that still holds up to this day. And it's all practical effects. Everything is done under a bright light, and it's forcing you to watch this. Now I understand 81 was the year of the wolf because Wolfen came out also. Yeah. The Howling came out, and then this one. Of the three, this is the best of the three by far. I'm gonna catch heat for this. I understand that the Howling's kind of boring. if we're being honest, it drags at points. It's got a good concept where this colony of werewolves know they're werewolves, and they embrace that. That being said, it takes forever. Like the animated wolf sex scene by the campfire, kind of, come on, it's kind of cheesy. But that being said, American Werewolf, that fucking transformation scene was just still to this day. I'll go on YouTube and watch it just to read the comments, and people are like, it's hard to believe that this was all practical
Yeah.
effects that did this. So much so, in fact, too, this was the first horror movie that officially won an Oscar,
Hmm.
thanks to Rick Baker's work, where they couldn't ignore this anymore. They knew this was going to be a thing, and that was the first of many that he got over his career. But I just think it's a very simplistic story where these fish out of water basically are in a situation where literally all hell breaks loose, and you kind of follow the one. He's the titular character, and you're rooting for him. He's one of the few like horror, because he is the villain ultimately, whether he is choosing to be or not. But you're ultimately rooting for him to kind of figure out a way to get out of this pickle that he's in, for lack of a better term. And you want to see him end up with that. Like, I mean, we all know in the end that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a happy ending, but it ends with probably the most doo-wop version of Blue Moon during the end credits, which, by the way, is brilliant. That there's three different versions of Blue Moon in the film, and two of them are the slower ballad, especially
Yeah.
during the transformation scene alone, which also makes this such an amazing scene. But then to have the balls to play like that upbeat doo-wop Blue Moon at the end, after all this happened, you're like, okay, I mean, I get it, but for me, this really is the ultimate. It's the ultimate werewolf movie. It's one of the gold standards for practical effects from the '80s. This and The Thing, by far. I can't say enough good things about this. The score, the locations, the characters. It's very relatable. We've all kind of had that fish out of water experience. I mean, not to this degree, but
No.
we've all felt like David
Yeah.
in a way, where we're like in this foreign land, whether it's him in England or us somewhere else. We've all had that. But I just it's just very relatable, I feel like, and then the special effects really kind of nail it home.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, the points that you're bringing up there, I completely like that transition scene. We're talking about this movie came out in 1981, like you say, the year of the werewolf, 42 years ago, and for that transformation scene to still, it is, you're absolutely right, it is the greatest transformation scene in the history of werewolf movies, in horror or wider cinema, and for that kind of scene, for that to still be the case 42 years later is incredible. That there's it's one thing for an overall great movie to still be great after all this time, but for effects like that to still be great after all this time,
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely something to behold. And like you say, for them to essentially make an Oscar category, for them to win an Oscar for best makeup, and Rick Baker, Rick Baker, I believe, was actually a little bit peeved about how little the transformation scene was actually going to be shown in the movie until he saw
He
the
was,
ovation it
yeah,
got in the cinema. So
yes. With he called them change-o heads. He said there was when I guess Landis was shooting the scene, and it was like within 3 seconds, and he yelled cut, and he's like, cut. He's like, what do you mean? Like, I spent months
yeah,
working on this. He's like, I got the shot. He's like, but, and then like you said, he saw the screening. I think it was in Westwood in California,
mm-hmm.
and the audience went absolutely ballistic during the transformation scene, and he was like, all right, job well done, man. I get it.
Yeah, and that just goes to show, and I think for me as well, when it comes to American Werewolf in London, um, it's always got respect for one of those things because it is one of those ultimate examples of less is more as well. Yeah, Rick Baker spent absolute months on this scene. That scene's over, so it's over quickly. And the actual werewolf only gets, I think it's about a minute of screen time in the whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so perfectly done. Um, I really love this sort of like you were saying earlier as well when we're talking about our main character as well. He is both our villain and our hero, and it's something that doesn't really happen often enough, or when it does happen, I don't think it's ever really handled in a particularly good way, is that sort of battle that's going on in between our main character of that sort of, if you really boil it down to that sort of good versus bad, if you want to go really basic with it, and I think here, it's handled really well because Dave, he's so likable. He is so likable, and yet we all know that he's the villain of the piece. you know, and it really does sort of it's an odd thing, I think, because like I said, I just don't think that's something that's explored often enough in horror, and you know, even when it is explored, it's just it seems it's often very heavy-handed, you know, that sort of good versus evil, you know.
Which I was going to say, Silver Bullet would probably be your best example of that.
Yeah,
When when the reveal happens that, and spoiler if nobody's seen it, when Reverend Lowe is revealed to be the werewolf in that film, he tries to atone for it, but ultimately says, "Fuck it, I'm going to be the world werewolf. I don't even care at this point."
yeah,
To the point he's killing children in that film, where at least David is like seriously considering like ending his life because he doesn't want anybody else to die. He understands that Jack was right. This was all real.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it. He's absolutely accepting the morality of what's going on, you know, and you know that's it's really good. I think that they've managed to sort of delve deeper into that because I think that so often can just be thrown away way too easily when it comes to you know writing and directing these things, you know. So that's great for me, and you know for me there's just not enough good werewolf movies out there. I think the list of good werewolf movies is very short.
You can probably count on one hand, and I can probably name them all right now. We would probably have the same ones, and this one would probably be at the top still.
Yeah,
And we would probably have Dog Soldiers on there.
we both would have Dog Soldiers on
We'd
there.
probably have Ginger Snaps.
Ginger Snaps is definitely on there.
I would say probably Silver Bullet,
Yep.
and if I had, I'm guessing The Howling because I know it's such a fan favorite. I mean, I don't hate it. It's just compared to this one, it's not even in the same league. But I know typically, or even like the Wolfman,
I
the
think
original with
I
Lon
think if
Chaney
you go,
Jr.
but I think I would probably put the Wolfman on there over the Howling, if I really had to sort of sit down and make that top five. But yeah, that's it. You know, for me, you know, and then once you start going beyond that, you know, you're really into sort of slim pickings. Like
You're reaching at that point after those five.
yeah, like because I mean. Do we really want to talk about An American Werewolf in Paris?
I mean, that's one of those. It's definitely a cash grab, and it's an end name only sequel. But
Yeah.
it's so bad that it's good that it needs to be watched.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those like party movies where if you get a few friends over your house and you get a few beers or smoke some marijuana, and pass the bowl around, and you'll enjoy it for what it is and what it as opposed to what it's trying to be versus what it isn't. And it's not a sequel. I don't even think there would ever be a sequel, a proper sequel to this. I know the rights are probably a mess right now.
Yeah.
I don't even know who even has the rights anymore because I know here in the States it was Universal, and now like I think Lionsgate actually has the
Yeah.
rights for it now. So I don't even know.
Yeah. I mean, I doubt. I don't think it's probably not something that anyone's really screaming out for as well either. But you know, actually, in a sort of weird twist, might actually make it the sort of perfect property to actually go and do something with because no one's really screaming out for it, sort of thing.
I've always said, and if somebody may listen to it, and I better get credit for, I won't, but I've always said if they were ever going to do anything with this, they laid the groundwork where it's kind of like John Carpenter's The Thing, where you're kind of just in the middle of what's going on with everything, even though like we're meeting David and Jack in this one, and then Mac and everybody else in The Thing, but you're kind of just like in the middle of something that was a bigger story beforehand. So I've always thought if they ever chose to, you probably could do like a Peacock or a Mac show just called East Proctor
Yeah.
and show how like the lineage of the wolf really began. And even you could even have, and your series finale already writes itself, where you can have it not even maybe show their face, but just show the back, David and Jack walking into the slaughtered lamb, and there's your series finale.
Yeah.
But you can have seasons upon seasons of backstory for the film, and then it could ultimately lead up to where Jack and David go to the slaughtered lamb for the first time.
Yeah.
Which is also pretty interesting too, because I don't know if you know this, in New York in the Village there actually is a slaughtered lamb
Oh, really?
bar that has the same post on the front of the building as it does in the movie.
It's really interesting because that scene where they're in, you know, they go into the pub and they're in the slaughtered lamb. You know, it's just for anyone from the UK who's familiar with sort of 80s and 90s sitcoms and you know our sort of soap operas, that scene is just absolutely filled with faces that are so familiar to us. You know, probably for me the most familiar one being Rick Mayall,
I was gonna
who's
say a drop dead Fred. Yeah.
Drop Dead Fred. He's done so much British sitcoms, things like The Young Ones and Bottom and Blackadder and all those sorts of things. You've got David Schofield's in there, who you know has gone on to have a really great career. You know, he was in Gladiator and Pirates of the Caribbean movies and everything else. Brian Glover, who's just someone who, you know, has completely went around the entire sort of UK sitcom soap opera circuit. He's been in like every single one you could possibly think of, you know. So it's just a scene that, for me, as someone who's a big fan of that sort of era of comedy television and things like that, I just love that scene. I love seeing Rick Mayall. Rick Mayall for me is you know, sadly obviously no longer with us, was such an incredible comedian, someone who his comic timing is honestly like no other. And I really encourage anyone who maybe is not as familiar with his work, go back and watch The Young Ones or Bottom or Drop Dead Fred or Blackadder. You know, he's the absolute king of slapstick comedy as well. But you know, the actual comedy timing of him, it's just impeccable, and there really was no one else like him. So I really I really recommend people going back.
And then another cameo that we get in the movie too, which also a lot of people forget, we have Frank Oz as the American embassy agent, who a lot of people, you know, surprisingly to this day don't know. Frank Oz is not only the voice of Miss Piggy, he's also the voice of Yoda in the Star Wars films. So that was also kind of cool. And when you hear him talk, you hear Miss Piggy and you hear Yoda.
Yeah.
He's not really doing much to his voice. He's maybe just like turning up a couple of octaves or a couple of pitches here and there, but it's him basically doing those voices, talking. And he has one of the best lines in the movies when it's like, these dumbass kids don't appreciate anything you do. You know?
And that's perfect, because that sort of leads me on to the other point I really want to make. Because, you know, one of the things I love about this movie as well is it just has that perfect balance of horror and genuine horror as well. And we're not just talking about, you know, things being relatively spooky or anything like that, like so many movies. Genuine horror, like the scene where they're going across the moors, you know, the scenes where, you know, like you're talking about in Piccadilly Circus, all those sorts of things, the transformation scenes, these are scenes of genuine horror. But the comedy element of this movie as well is absolutely spot on.
Like the one scene when Jack comes to him for the first time after you see him, he's all torn up, and this is always pointed out. I know our buddy Rob pointed it out on the other one, but it's been for years, so we can all, and even Rick Baker himself, that when Jack is talking, there's like that one little piece of like flesh that collapsed. And the first lines that he asks him when he comes back as a zombie is, "Can I have a piece of toast?" And the response is, "Get the fuck out of here, Jack." You know, it's little shit like that. Or when he's taking a leak after he had like an all-night boning session with the nurse, and then Jack is there while he's taking a leak, and then he screams and he's like, "You're not real," and he tells him, "Don't be a putz, David." Like they're talking like they never missed a beat as friends. So yeah, you're right. The comedy and the horror go hand in hand in this film. I know it really wasn't the first one, but I think this was the first one to kind of perfect it.
Yeah, because
kind of set the blueprint for this, like for Shaun of the Dead later on.
Yeah,
for
because
example,
you know, it's something that me and I'll call him my Nico. It's something that me and our Nico has we've talked about it at length on so many different episodes now. You know, finding that balance between genuine horror and good comedy is I think possibly one of the most difficult things you can do in horror, because you know, if you skew off even slightly, if you deviate even slightly from, you know, having that balance, it'll throw off the entire movie, you know. And you know,
Oh,
you
100%.
really need to stay true to the sort of vibe that you're going for, you know. And so, there are so few movies out there for me, and you know, you mentioned one of them, Shaun of the Dead for me is one of them that, you know, absolutely perfected. It knows the vibe that it wanted to go for, it went for it, and it stayed in it. It stayed in the lane that it wanted to be in, you know. It didn't then go and try and be something that it wasn't.
Right, and any filmmaker, you know, that will tell you that the two hardest genres to accomplish anything in, surprisingly, are both comedy and horror, because you more than likely you know, you have to kind of, not more than likely, drama, they're easy to kind of do for the most part because somebody can just act monotone and kind of, you're in a drama when somebody's just kind of, stone face and just kind of whatever. Action movies, you get it because you got Schwarzenegger, you got Stallone, you got The Rock, you got all them guys. Um, Sci-fi, you can kind of tell by the settings, but really comedy and horror are the two hardest because those have you want to elect the reaction out of your crowd.
Yeah.
So if you have a comedy and your audience isn't laughing, you're in trouble. If you have a horror movie where your audience isn't scared, you have a problem. But to be insane enough to kind of merge the two
Mm-hmm.
and do it well, I know John Landis's problems aside with the Twilights, in which we could talk about that in a whole another thing. That being aside, I will give the devil his due on this one. He did a bang up job by merging the two genres together. Look, after this one, we got The Return of the Living Dead, which also did a great job of merging comedy and horror. We already said Shaun of the Dead. This all paved way. Kind of Airplane and Naked Gun would probably be the one to really get like the credit for it. But Scary Movie, to a degree, probably owes a little bit to American Werewolf, even
Yeah,
to a degree. Even Scream,
yeah,
to a degree.
100%. All of these movies, that try and have that balance. They would have been really remiss if they didn't look at this and think, right, because like the balance is just so perfect in it, and like we said, that's just such a difficult thing. You're talking about it, horror. I completely agree with you because horror and comedy are so subjective things. You mentioned all the different genres you can have. There, drama, action movies. There's. And I don't mean to be sort of disparaging to those genres because there are absolutely great movies in those genres as well. And that's yeah. But there's an absolute formula to so many of those movies. Whereas when it comes to comedy and horror, they're so subjective. It's so down to your personal tastes and what frightens you and personal experience and things like that. Something that I would find terrifying because something shitty happened to me when I was 6 or 7 years old. That's not going to have the same resonance for yourself and vice versa,
Right.
and things like
Right.
that. So for something to sort of transcend the audience like that, and even just taking that straw poll that we mentioned earlier, for 86% of people in that poll to say yes, absolutely, this movie needs to go on your list of things you should see before you die, that tells you that that really they hit the nail on the head absolutely
And
perfectly.
it's funny too to kind of just piggyback on a little bit. I know one of the critiques that he got when the film came out, I'm not playing the pronoun game, John Landis got, was this is either too scary to be funny or it's too funny to be scary. And then years later, it's become such a cult classic within the not just horror fans, but I think film fans in general. Comedy Central in the States shows this around Halloween time. So that should tell you there, but it also plays on like the AMC Fear Fest or FX or Sci-Fi Channel at the at the time of Halloween, and especially more during Halloween. This movie, obviously, any horror movie plays more during Halloween, but the fact that Comedy Central shows it, that says a lot.
Yeah.
That this isn't something they normally would show. So
Yeah. I think just a last couple of points from me, and then I'll let you have the floor for any sort of finishing up points that you want. One of the things that really sort of stood out to me, because like again, like we do for our main episodes as well, is we ask people what they think, and one of the things that really sort of stuck out to me that even the people who were coming into to us on socials and responding to our posts about it, and were saying, even if it's not their favorite movie of all time, they still think it should be included on this list. I think it's just one of those few movies that just has that sort of that universal appreciation. Even if people don't personally think that this is the greatest movie, they still believe that it's up there and deserves to be up there and recognized as one of those ultimate sort of horror movies that everyone should see. And I think that really does say something because, it's a rare thing in the horror community. We've discussed a lot of different horror movies on the House That Screams, and it's a rare thing that you get tens across the board, for example. That doesn't happen every week. So yeah, definitely for me. Because like for example, obviously Candy responded to our post about it, and she said, "As much as I hate John Landis, it's a perfect film." So it's one of those things. True. Moonlight Writing was along the similar lines. Yes, I don't like it personally, but it widely recognized as a classic, and I think all horrors with that status should be watched just for the experience. And again, friend of both shows, Ren, I say yes only because everyone needs to see the transformation scene. The movie is decent, not great without it. So there you go. So like, there's 3 examples of people. They're all saying, this. Well, Candy obviously saying it's a perfect film, but the other 2, sorry, saying this isn't my favorite film of all time. However, everyone needs to go and see this, and that's such a rare thing.
It is, and I think one of the things we didn't touch on during this, I know we didn't have much time, which is fine, is the whole David's nightmares and dreams, and like the dream within a dream, that Landis ripped off from the director, which it works for this, but it also makes you question: am I seeing? Am I really seeing what I'm seeing? The answer is yes, for the most part, except for when he's actually asleep when he gets up. The one thing I'm actually like, and this again, as I said, this is my favorite horror movie of all time. I've double dipped. I can't tell you how many times on the physical media with this. When Universal, when I worked at Suncoast, came out with the collector's edition on DVD, the first VHS I ever bought with my own money was this movie. Okay, so that should tell you something. So I'll go back to the VHS days with this. Anytime it's on, I don't care. I own it. I'll watch it if it's on TV. I have the Arrow 4K set that came with the booklet, the double-sided poster, the lobby cards. I think I have in my closet every single Fright Rags American Werewolf t-shirt that's in existence. Anytime somebody wants to get me a gift for my birthday or Christmas, that's the first thing to do is like they'll go on TeePublic, or if I don't have it, they'll send it to me. I went to the Monster Mania horror convention. There's a company there, Paul Bearer Press, who is now a good friend of the House and Scream show. They had this awesome American Werewolf shirt, and I'm like, well, fuck, I gotta get that because I love this movie so much. I mean, I even have like the NECA figures. I have the Nightmare Demon, where it's the interchangeable head, but I also have the Kessler Werewolf, which is a thing of beauty that I cannot wait. I'm gonna get that thing signed in November because Griffin Dunn is actually doing a convention with David Naughton together. Awesome. They're doing an American Werewolf reunion. So I think it's the first time that they're doing shows together, and I'm probably mistaken because if he's done shows before, I don't know about it. But I've had the pleasure of meeting David Naughton a few times. He's one of the nicest guys in the world, and he is so appreciative of the fact that people love this movie so much that every time I meet him, he's like, "Didn't you meet me last time?" I was like, "Yeah, but this," and I get starstruck. I don't get starstruck from many. He's one because of how much I love this movie. Yeah. That. My friend that passed away last year, one of the last cons we went to was that one, and he was there, and even she was like, "You're shaking," and I'm like, he was laughing. He's like, "Why are you shaking around me?" And I'm like, "Because, dude, it's how much I love this fucking movie. Like, you don't understand. Like, this is my movie." So, I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, it's highly recommended in my book for this. It's my top of all time. It's really my true gateway horror drug that got me into the horror genre was this movie, and I think if it wasn't for this movie, I don't know that I would be on the path where I'm going to make my own and discover other films like Friday the 13th, and on my own anyway. I mean, I'm sure I would have heard about them in the schoolyard as a kid, but on my own to be discovering these, it's because of American Werewolf in London. Because I discovered it on my own through Michael Jackson's Thriller, of all things. So we're gonna Tarantino this and bring it all the way back around. So thanks to Michael Jackson is how I found my favorite. Say what you will about him, Prince is better, yes, but of that time, Thriller is still the shit. And if it wasn't for Thriller, I would have never found this movie. So I got to give props to MJ for that one alone. So. That's the true story of how I found American Werewolf in London.
That's the big takeaway from this episode is thank you, Michael Jackson.
Thank you, Michael Jackson.
No,
because I mean, people don't hate on John Landis enough. I'm thinking like, oh, Michael Jackson now too. So
no, I think it's
so
very,
here we go.
It's very safe to say that An American Werewolf in London is a movie that we recommend absolutely across the board. You've obviously already mentioned that it's absolutely recommended across the board by everyone on the House That Screams podcast. So American Werewolf in London will absolutely take the very first spot on our definitive list of horror movies that we think everyone should see before they die. That will wrap it up for this episode. Nico, thank you so much for joining me for our very first bucket list horror episode. Thank you for coming on and speaking so passionately about An American Werewolf in London.
let me just tell you, I am honored that I was I didn't realize I was the first one. I'm very honored for this. So thank you for allowing me to be the first guest on the bucket list episode. And we done. We'll be chopping it up again on the House that Screams, and I'll be more than happy to come back, and I will talk more bucket list films that people should see, because I have a vast I don't want to say Tarantino knowledge of horror films, but we're gonna say like a vast Tarantino knowledge of horror films that people should be seeing. But thank you, Ian. Seriously, I really
No,
appreciate it. I'm
absolutely.
honored. I'm honored that I was your
I've
first
been
guest
so
for this.
I've been so keen to get you on the show for such a long time now. I know just obviously from our interactions from the House of Screens, just how knowledgeable you are about horror movies, and I was really keen to sort of get you on here and talk about something. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on, and I really appreciate it. I know our Nico really appreciates it. So yeah, thank you very much for agreeing to come on. But
I think we're gonna have to have a Nico and Nico meet and greet.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
We're gonna have to do that.
Just to confuse everyone. Before we get out of here, do you want to just quickly do your plugs again?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at El Jefe del Horror, but mostly you could follow my film that's in pre-production, Sticks and Stones movie. We're on every social media. We're getting a TikTok soon too, because I guess that's the thing I have to do next too. But we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the new one, the Threads, that I don't know what it is, but we're on there. And I guess TikTok will be next. And if there's another social media platform, we'll probably be on there next. So. And you can follow the House that Screams, all of us, Candy, Sean, Dave, Crystal, Erica. We're all on the interwebs, and also follow these fine people of the Podcast of the Damned, because I love these guys, and these guys are awesome, and they're kick ass. And
thank you so much.
I'm honored to be on here, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Almost everyone that you've just mentioned there has already agreed to come on to also do a bucket list horror movie. They've picked some really fine, wonderful films, things that some people might not expect. So there's going to be a couple of exciting ones there. Although you probably could guess what Candy's one is.
I probably already know exactly what it is, because it's my sister from another mister, so I know her like the back of my hand. So yeah.
We've got some really exciting movies coming there, and we've got some other guests already lined up as well. Other friends of the show, other podcasts. We've got an up and coming horror author who's agreed to come on. So we've got some really exciting guests coming on. Hopefully we can continue to spread that out and get some more people on the show. And we would absolutely be delighted to have you back at some point as well, Nico, to talk more about
anytime I would
horror movies.
Anytime I will come back.
All of those links and plugs that Nico just did, you'll find in the description for this episode and across our social media. So please go give them a follow and check them out. And you can follow us on Twitter at Damned Podcast, and we're on Facebook and Instagram, Pod with the Damned. We are also on TikTok and Threads. I'm a little bit lax with those, but go follow us there as well as you want. And you can follow us on YouTube as well, where we'll post all of our video content up there. And we are also trying to do some fun shorts and various other bits and pieces. Like the social media is there's just so much about these days. It's more than a full-time job, but we'll get there. But that's it. And until next week on the Pod of the Damned, just remember, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.